I think with that, if other folks join us, that's fine. But otherwise, I'm going to get started with this process. Thank you to everyone that has joined today. My understanding is that many that have joined today will be new to the peer review process. My guess as well is that there's some folks that are more experienced looking for a refresher, and maybe those that are experts that can maybe give some feedback. I want to make it clear, this is the best practice as I understand it, using the resources I have available, but that does not mean it's perfect. And I'm very open to feedback. I think that's one of the things that I most like about the peer review process is that if you do it right, it lends itself to constructive advancements, but it takes two people to play that game. The other thing that I want to mention is that I am indeed a neurodiverse individual myself. That is not a problem, of course, except for the fact that sometimes I get extremely excited and will start talking at the speed of light. If that happens, please feel free to chime in and say, Clay, can you slow down a bit? Or maybe can we go back to that last slide? Or I didn't quite catch that. I am never offended by that. And I hope if anyone else is, you're not here, because I think that this is a perfectly fine context and a perfectly fine question to ask someone like me. I'm very comfortable with it. All those caveats and background information in mind, it is my pleasure to introduce myself. My name is Dr. Clay Magill. I'm an associate professor of biogeochemistry at the Lyell Centre at Heriot-Watt. My expertise is actually in understanding human evolution and how we can use archaeological residues of stuff they ate, things they threw around, whatever else, to then reconstruct what our ancestors did in the past. But today I'm going to be wearing a slightly different hat and talking more about how we can look at the peer review system and save time for ourselves, allow our own insights and instincts to be incorporated into our reviews, and make those reviews as beneficial as possible for those that receive them and the funding bodies that request those reviews. With that in mind, I've called this the art and science of reviewing proposals, and I hope you'll enjoy the next 20 to 40 minutes of maybe some seminar discussion type stuff, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers at the end. If you have a pressing question as we go through this discussion or session or seminar, or whatever you want to call it, feel free to chime in, but unless it's, in your opinion and use your discretion, an important point, I'd rather wait till the end. Otherwise, I will get distracted and start talking about God knows what, and that's going to sort of break the continuity just a little bit. So keep that in mind if you have points to raise. Next, go. There, cool. I thought I'd give you a brief agenda so you know where we're starting from and where we're going. This is something that I like to see because if I'm honest, even in 20-minute talks, I start to get bored about 5 minutes in. And this helps me figure out where I'm going and lets you know a little about where we're going to. Feel free to recommend things in the future if you see something missing here, because as I mentioned, this is an iterative process that hopefully will continue to get better. In any case, we're going to start today with a brief introduction to reviewing proposals. We're then going to move on to the goals of the reviewing process, how to give constructive feedback, the limits of information processing, which is another way of saying what are our inherent shortcomings as a species, and then mitigating personal biases so that we can get the best out of ourselves and give the best to those that we give peer review back to. I'll have a quick summary at the end, and also I'll emphasize that we'll have a question and answer session after that summary part. So write down any thoughts you might have. You'll also notice that each slide will have a slide number. You can use that to your advantage and reference it during our Q&A so that you don't have to say, a third of the way through, I think you had a slide that was blue. I'm not going to be very good at tracking that down. Numbers I can do, though. Excellent. So today's purpose, sort of written in black and white, is that EDICa, as who we are here to support, strives to provide an equitable, competitive, and transparent merit-based review process. I want to emphasize that your contribution, no matter how small, how big, how perfect, or how imperfect you may be, is important to making the decisions about funding that will be the result of this process. Every review is also an important source of feedback for the authors as well as for EDICa. By understanding what you think, bringing your expertise, background, and perspective to this process, you're going to really round out the ability for us to do the best science and research possible and also make the biggest impact. Or credo, I think, for this process from start to finish is, what would I want to see? We're going to use some examples from my own personal peer reviews in the past. I have redacted names, but when I look at some of them, I spent so much time trying to do a good job and did so little that actually benefits anyone, probably all, but certainly the reviewer and the reviewing agency. And we're going to talk about that using sort of some real examples in addition to sort of some template kind of things. The session today aims to provide insights about the peer review process, obviously, and I'm also going to try to give you some helpful tips for reviewing proposals. Those tips are meant to get the most out of yourself in the time you have available, as well as maximize the ease and convenience of sort of collecting or integrating the information that's provided from you for the peer review. The three things we'll really be thinking about in particular are how to efficiently structure a proposal review. This might sound, I don't know, a bit draconian or something. You're like, structured to a personal review. But I find if we use a consistent and straightforward template, it actually makes the whole process better for all involved. We'll talk a little bit about how to understand the review criterion, including what they will be. This will be further given to you during the actual review process, but I want to give you some highlights so that you can ask questions now or feedback to the EDICa about things that aren't clear. And last but not least, we're going to talk about how to reduce impact from unconscious bias. I am not going to do a huge, curbing bias or curbing unconscious bias discussion. There's actually some evidence to suggest that these sort of conversations don't really help very much. But I think in the context of peer review, it's important to highlight a few things that all of us do. And when I say all of us, I'm most certainly projecting onto you, but I hope you all do. Otherwise, that makes me the only one that does it. And I don't like that idea. So we're going to sort of focus on those three things, and it'll be an iterative process. We'll go through one by one, but we'll reference back to the pieces that we've already discussed. Once again, our goal with this session is to help you craft high-quality reviews that deliver the best return on the time you invest. And these are an investment, and that's worth recognizing and appreciating now. If you don't have that time or interest, I highly recommend you back out of this opportunity. Take these notes and slides with you because they're helpful in any context. And if you are here and ready to invest that time, it will improve EDICa's review process and improve your ability to give good, efficient, constructive, and timely feedback. You'll notice as we go through today's slides that a lot of the slides are sort of basic and a little bit, I don't want to say boring, but that's the right word, a little bit boring. And I've done that on purpose. I'm hoping to be here to sort of keep things lively with my hand waving and voice inflections. But I want the slides to be something you can quickly and easily access. So whenever you sort of need to reference them when you're doing a review or talking to someone else about it, it's more of a checklist that you can look at quickly rather than trying to decipher what the image I've added means. I am a sucker for aesthetic looking things, and that was not my goal with this. So you will get a few pretty pictures, but a lot of it will be content that's meant to be structured, easily accessible, and very quick and useful to use. So at the end of this session, the benefits to you will be that you will have the tools and background that you need to provide concise and constructive feedbacks, and you'll be able to identify and avoid unintentional biases in your reviews. I also strongly encourage you to use this as a line on your CV. I would absolutely put, and I will put on my CV, by the way, that I have attended unconscious bias training, that I have looked at a little bit about the peer review process, and I have done as much as possible to make sure that I understand how to contribute to the peer review feedback. It's one more little thing that you can get out of this besides an hour of listening to an American get overexcited about peer review. But also, it's a good point in general. If you're here, you probably are somebody that appreciates diversity. You're somebody that appreciates how difficult it is to be inclusive, and that equitable is something that is maybe more of an ideal than something we can achieve in the immediate future. And I want you to know that that's all taken into account here, and you can get more out of this than just that. Good. So today's motivation is to improve the contents of reviews. UKRI, who is the overarching funding body for most UK research institute or research councils, as well as some of things like NERC, EPSRC, and others, did some work with surveys and found that out of 2,600 scientists that were reviewed or interviewed, surveyed about the peer review process, the number one thing that people wanted was content that actually helped them. The other thing that peer reviewers consistently say is that it takes so much time and effort for so little sort of benefit to the peer reviewer or benefit to the person getting the feedback. So what we're going to talk about today is really ways of checking these two boxes to improve the content you provide and reduce the amount of time and effort you need to invest in these reviews. In a grander sense, we're really talking about how to improve the review process. I want to emphasize right now that as we go through these slides and talk about ways to put things in, ways to not put things in, I really think it's worth mentioning that you should trust your intuition on this. I spend a lot of time as a reviewer saying, oh no, am I right or wrong? Is this going to be taken well? And I found that the more that I review and the more reviews that I get, and as I sit on national and international panels, it's much more important to let you seep through. We're asking you as a peer reviewer to put yourself in there. That means take advantage of the expertise you have. Don't be afraid to say when you lack expertise, and don't be afraid to be wrong. Wrong is a very subjective term, even in the best of contexts, but usually wrong to you just means that you're, at least if you're like me, a little bit nervous about your expertise level and a little bit nervous about the way you're delivering it. I trust that if you follow the slides as we talk about them today and use your best practices, bring your best self or whatever, all of those things are minor compared to the amount of help and feedback that you'll give in a constructive sense if you let you come through the process. Indeed, by following just a few, I'm going to say relatively simple steps, nothing in practice is ever quite as easy as it looks on a PowerPoint slide. Your reviews will be higher value to those who submit them, meaning those that receive your feedback, as well as the EDICa. We're talking about, at least in my opinion, a lot of money here. And depending on your career stage, or maybe independent of your career stage, the feedback and decisions made during this process can be very impactful. That's something I take very seriously because I've been on both ends of good and bad reviews, getting funding and not getting funding. And the feels run high. Whenever things are good, they feel great. When things are down, they feel really bad. And I want you to start to understand how you can contribute to that and make the best of all those situations. You'll also will help to ensure that the review process, not just for EDICa, but more widely abroad, is more equitable and transparent. This is something that I get really frustrated about. The process is not always transparent. And if I'm honest with you, I have sat on more than one peer review panel where I found that a lot of the things we talk about today are not widely appreciated, or worse yet, are appreciated and are masked over by a whole bunch of people who say, I don't have any bias. My feedback's always constructive because I'm always right. Not quite sure that's how that works. And so I'd like to think that all of us are doing our part to improve that process for ourselves and others. So the three things that we really want to get out of the peer review process, whether that's for a national funding agency, whether that's for a smaller grant offering body, whether it's for peer review articles or otherwise, is we want the process to be fair. A better word's probably equitable here, but fair is what I've come across in my own dealings with funding agencies. We want to be consistent and we want to be constructive. Now, these three words seem fairly straightforward, but as you're going to see today, or at least I saw when I was making these slides, it's not as easy as just saying I'm being equitable, I'm being fair, I'm being consistent, or I'm being constructive. We need to start to do things that sort of guide us or somewhat force us to do this. Otherwise, the human mind likes to run rampant. Now, I'm speaking a bit out of order here, but as a middle-aged man that is going through what I deem a midlife crisis, I find that I like to think that I'm fair, consistent, and constructive all the time. But in reality, when I talk to other people, it's not so straightforward. And these are not maybe so easy to achieve. So I encourage you to ask questions and sort of play devil's advocate with yourself. I really like to think about, would I be able to defend this view in front of a friend, a colleague, a family member, myself if it was anyone else but me? And I'm frequently appalled by the answers. And I think that's a good thing. I challenge you to do the same. As we go through this process of talking about slides today, I'm going to give you some ways to organize and keep yourself sort of going in the direction you want. And they are very extrapolatable to almost any kind of review, whether that's peer review or otherwise. If I'm quite honest with you, I also use this for dealing with my pets in the home. That's probably a bit crazy, but I like to think about, my animal, my friend I live with. Am I being fair, consistent, and constructive? And once again, I find that a lot of the things I do that make problems are a me issue, not a them issue. Good. The first thing I want to tell you is sort of the heavy news. Peer reviewing is not an easy process. You have to think and you have to be constructive in your criticism. That is sometimes hard whenever something is really annoying, obviously wrong, or most commonly infringes my area of super niche expertise. And I'm like, whoa, wait, they need to understand that I'm a superstar at this. I'm probably not anyway. And furthermore, that's not really the purpose here. The second thing is that peer reviews are time consuming. On average, reviewers spend between 2 and 4 hours on each proposal they review. Given the size of the reviews or the proposals for EDICa, you can expect to spend a little bit less than this, maybe 1 to 3 hours. But I'm telling you this because you need to make sure you have that time. Otherwise, a lot of the unconscious cognitive processes, the things that we're hardwired to do, make quick assessments in complex situations, to use our best judgment based on our own experience, ideas, and beliefs to judge others, start to run rampant because you are in fight or flight mode. That is what our species has spent the last 4 million years perfecting. You need to control that. And that's what will really limit, in many cases, the quality of your review. The other thing that we can do to benefit the peer review process in terms of content and time is give you specific ways to make it less time consuming and more likely to be fair. That is a lot of what the rest of the slides will be about. How can I take this big, giant process that is hugely heterogeneous and quite honestly unpredictable? You don't know quite what you're going to get sometimes, and distill it to a process that's far more likely to be fair, far more likely to give constructive feedback, and not be a complete drain on your time, effort. And if you're like me and many people that have neurodiverse or other kinds of issues in life, I get drained for like 2 days afterwards, which means that we're talking about more than just the time that you're spending on the review itself. We're talking about days after. That is something, again, I take very seriously because it matters and it has an effect. Good. So what we're going to start with is talking about constructive feedback. Now, I found this really interesting clip art thing here. I am apparently not the only one that wants to talk about delivering constructive criticism. And what I have found is that one of the best ways to deliver constructive criticism is to imagine you are the one who submitted the proposal. I find this is also very useful for me whenever I'm reflecting on how to improve my own proposals. If I see something in another proposal that I find very good or very bad, it's useful to think about if it was in my own work and what do I want to hear. I'm admittedly soft-skinned, I think is the term. I take things very personally and I get real grumpy when I'm wrong. It is a personal shortcoming, but at least I'm aware of it. So what I spend a lot of time doing is thinking about what would make me go, ouch, and what would make me go, I need to improve this, and here is a way how. We're going to focus on the latter part. The saying ouch part is a good way to get rid of destructive feedback. It is very common, and if I'm completely honest with you, as you go up in the historically privileged context, I'm talking about white, upper middle class white men typically, but not always. It tends to ramp up where you get destructive feedback. Many people give feedback as a way to just demonstrate to themselves primarily, but whoever else is reading their feedback, they want to show that they are the expert and they are the best. Try to limit that in this process. I already know you're the best. That's why we want you to review for us. And the people that get feedback from you aren't probably going to care if you're the best, especially if you give them negative feedback. So I'm not saying you say yes to everything. That is a natural tendency of mine to say, everything's great, I'm constructive now. Rather, we want to talk about how we contextualize the feedback we give so that it gives the maximum amount of benefit to those receiving it, but it's not personal, mean, or like derogatory, which by the way, happens way more often than you might think. So what we want to talk about is how you structure that constructive feedback. The very most typical way of getting feedback during the peer review process is what you see on the left now. The reviewer gives a very long review a summary of the proposal, which is not very helpful because either the funding body doesn't have the time to read the proposal, or they have already read the proposal. And if you are the one that wrote the proposal, you already know what you're talking about. There is some small amount of benefit here, because if the reviewer says something that you did not anticipate doing, and that is apparently what they think you are only doing, well, yeah, that proposal summary is a little bit helpful, but otherwise we want to shy away from that. The other thing that happens is people give their summary rating or their funding suggestion with one word: good, bad, ugly, yes, no, whatever the case may be. And there's no contextualization, and there's no way to know what happens. This is why I mentioned earlier that I use a lot of the tools we're talking about today, not just for peer review, but also for supervision, for sort of life coaching of myself, and for interactions with things like pets. Because whenever you just say no, I don't know, and spray them with water or something, they're not going to get anything about it. It's how you present that feedback that makes it so important. What we're going to compare this thing on the left to is something on the right that is much more useful for the person receiving the review, the funding body, and yourself. This will also save a mass of time. What you can see here is it may be a better way of going about constructive feedback. You do give a sentence or two about what the proposal is meant to focus on. This is a proposal to research, fill in the blank. You can then move on to the aspects of the proposal that are being focused on by the funder. Intellectual merit is usually one of the aspects. Broader impacts is usually one of the aspects. What I'd like to suggest to do, and what I now do in all of my reviews, is have a strengths and weaknesses part, and then a summary that talks about exactly why I gave the summary rating I did, with concrete examples from the text itself. What I'm going to do here real quick is actually show you some of my own peer reviews. Some of these are very recent, so I've redacted the names. I sit on review panels for NERC, National Science Foundation in the US, Swiss National Science Foundation, SNSF, as well as a few others. And I have found that the processes we're talking about sort of cross international lines, and it's generally smiled upon in every context that I have found. So what I'm going to do here is hit stop share, bring up Zoom. No, not that button. I promise that I will make it through this, although I am admittedly terrible at technology. Good. Let's pick this one first. Share. So hopefully now you can see a whole bunch of words. This is a review from the National Science Foundation in the United States. And what it is really represents all the things that we kind of don't want that we just looked at. Everything down to right here where I say respectfully yours is basically a summary of the paper. The authors already know what their paper is about. The editor probably doesn't care. They just want to know what my expert opinion on it is. And I probably spent a solid 45 minutes to an hour just writing this part, which no one's going to read, and the authors don't care about. I then went on to make what I called major comments. These are fairly good, although there's not really a distinction between strengths and weaknesses. So, I find the use of precision here a bit confusing. I should just say weakness. Your word use of precision is not clear. I don't have to then go through and tell them everything they need to know about that. That's not my job. I spent a lot of time doing this. I tried my best, but I'd say I sort of missed the mark when I did this because I wasn't thinking about reviewing from the person receiving the review, and I wasn't thinking about the editors or the funders that had to look at this. The other thing that I did was what I call minor comments. Do you see that at least half of this is on a whole bunch of things that are important, like grammar and spelling, but are not my role and not really useful to anyone but me feeling like I helped? This is not how you should spend your time. I can tell you explicitly that there will be a slide here in about 10 minutes that says grammar and spelling is not part of the merit review for EDICa. Now, if it's so bad that you can't understand what's going on, that is worth mentioning. But grammar mistakes are okay. Do your best to overlook them because that doesn't influence the quality and originality of the work. It's more of a polish that we can talk about. This is especially true because as we talk about EDI concepts, many folks that make those mistakes that I have highlighted here are non-native English speakers, which is also not a criteria. In fact, it's something we want to celebrate and embrace. So what is the real purpose of all these minor comments? And I'd argue it was to make myself feel like I was doing things and to show that I cared about the review. There are other better ways to do that. What we're going to do now is contrast that with a different peer review. Now, where did that screen go? You get down there. Good. Here is, oh, actually, this is the even worse review. That's okay, though. This one is also by me. And what you will see is that there is nothing here but a huge amount of words and text that is not easy to go through. This is one of the reviews I spent the longest time ever on. I think it took me like 4 hours. And I am pretty sure that everyone that looked at this said, just tell me, please, what are the strengths and weaknesses and what do you recommend my decision is? None of that is here. It's a whole bunch of details that aren't clear. If instead we go back to our presentation, good, make this big. Look at how different what you see right here off to the right is. It's very structured. There's not tons of sentences, huge paragraphs. It says strengths, weaknesses, and links it to something like intellectual merit. It has a summary at the end that talks about what you think is good and how you would rate the proposal based on that. It's very templated. Now, you don't have to use this exact template, although this is the one that I now like to use, but this kind of structure benefits everyone, including you. With this merit review criteria, what you want to sort of do is take this last slide and adapt it for each component of the merit review criteria that's given to you by the funders. In our case, we're going to want to think about the eligibility, which is already taken off. We had pre-reviewers make sure that the core aspects of the reviews are already checked. And what you're going to do is the assessment criteria. That includes intellectual merit and broader impacts. In a very general sense, intellectual merit is going to be related to the potential advance of knowledge. How does this improve our understanding of the topics at hand in the world around us? Do the proposed activities explore creative, new, transformative ideas? Is this something that matters? I often call this the excitement factor. I want to be excited when I read these. And if I'm not, that's not necessarily bad, but it does reflect something about the work that I would mention in my review. And last but not least for intellectual merit is the plan for carrying out the activities well-reasoned, well-organized, and feasible. You can't have 10 billion pounds to do whatever you want and assume everyone's going to play by the rules. And if you do, you're not on planet Earth. You're somewhere else because that's not how it works here. So that's something to factor into your assessment of the intellectual merit. The intellectual merit criteria, the assessment criteria for EDICa are here. They're steps 1 through 8. I'm going to briefly go over them because I don't necessarily want you to focus on these specific criteria, although this is for EDICa. We're talking about bigger views here. That said, the EDICa proposals for the flexible fund will have 8 different targets. One is the degree to which the proposal adopts a co-design approach and how the stakeholders are engaged. I can promise you that many people, including me, if I'm honest, use the word co-design, things like multidisciplinary, words like inclusive and diversity as like a checkbox. And co-design in reality is very different than writing the word in your proposal. That side of writing it in the proposal and making sure it's sort of focused in the correct direction has already been vetted, but it is up to you, your intuition, your experience, and your best insights to make a more thorough and deeper assessment of that aspect of each proposal. Number 2 is the degree to which the proposals address an evidence gap, specifically one relating to the exercise of academic judgment, et cetera. You can read there. Once again, we want to make sure we're getting something new and novel out of this. I keep saying don't reinvent the wheel, and that applies to this research some in many ways. There are examples where you can sort of reinvent the wheel because you're making a new polymer or something, I guess to sort of extrapolate the analogy to infinitum. But more so, we want to make sure that we're getting data that's meaningful and helps us understand something that's new or we don't already understand. Number 3 is the degree to which proposals create impact. Will this matter? I see so many projects that sound so cool, but it doesn't matter. It's so hyper theoretical or hyper niche that it's not meaningful to anyone but the person that proposed it. There is a time and a place for that, but it is not the flexible fund call. It is some other very targeted funding call that would tell you, we want you to focus on these specific kinds of details. That is not where we're at here. We want to talk about creating impact. Number 4 is applications engaged with or led by early career researchers or innovators. This is something that is fairly unique to EDICa. Some other funding agencies do mention an interest or almost an accelerator for early career researchers and innovators. And that is something that we're talking about here. The people that most often suffer at the hands of peer review are those that are less experienced or have less support in terms of mentorship, institutional facilities, et cetera. And we are trying to make a specific attempt to allow those that are trying early on to rise to the top and learn from that experience that is otherwise very much bogarted is not the right word, oh my God, hoarded by people that have lots of resources available to them. Number 5 is proposals with the interdisciplinary and cross-sector partnership, which reflect the range of research and innovation in the UK and abroad. Again, this is a way of saying, are we looking at more than one aspect of the R&I, or research and innovation sector? Number 6 is the quality of the EDI plan. I see many EDI plans that say, we will do whatever the minimum our human resources department imposes upon us. That's going to get a frowny face from me. That's going to go into a weakness section. And I'm going to say, in order to improve this, I recommend that you take those as a minimum metric and improve upon them so that research, equity, diversity, and inclusiveness is more than something that is a legal cover for yourself, but rather a celebration of different perspectives, different views, and all those individuals that contribute to our research and innovation sector. Now, that sounded a little prescribed to me. Maybe I would squint at that funny too. But what I am saying here is we want to see more than just the minimum. We don't want this as just a legal sort of checkbox. We want it as something that promotes everybody being part of this, especially those that haven't had an opportunity to try it out yet. Number 7 is the robustness of methodology. This is one of those places where I want to recommend you let the spirit of you shine through. I am frequently not an expert in everything that is in proposals that I review. In fact, if I'm honest with you, 99% of the time, I understand 50% or less of what's going on. That is where it is okay to say things like, I am not an expert in every part of this proposal, but based on my expertise and my experience, these are what I would suggest. These are the parts I don't understand. I can't comment on those is a perfectly reasonable response. Be honest with yourself, because if you're not, people like me are going to read it and go, I guess he's, I guess she, I guess they are perfect at everything. I have to take it at face value. That's not the best for you. It's certainly not best for those that are receiving feedback. And last but not least, the flexible fund, like most funding pools of money, is not infinite. So we want to talk about value for money. Are we going to get a lot out of this for the investment that we put in? Sadly, economic currency is not maybe the best way of understanding value. I would say there's something to consider besides monetary stature. But this is a good metric for saying, if we're going to put in funds, are the funds well spent here? Are we getting an impact? Are we getting something new? Are we lifting up those that haven't had a chance to do science research yet, or whatever kind of research we may be talking about? Is there a value for this research? These merit review criteria are very specific to the EDICa flexible funding call that you'll be looking at now. I want to reiterate that you don't need to memorize these or like save this slide. I mean, you can, but they'll be given to you in real time so that you can look back on them. And I recommend that you take these, write them down, and when you're looking through a proposal, start to take notes as you're reading it through and sort of fill in underneath them. It'll save you time later on when you come back and sort of fill out your ideas more fully. You won't have to read the proposal 30 times. You can maybe read it 3. Once to go through and get an overview of what's going on, once to go through and make notes, and once to go through and sort of fill out your actual assessment now that you have notes and some familiarity. If you're reading the proposal more than 4 or 5 times, you're probably not using your time as efficiently as you could. And I can't say this for everyone, but I'd like to think it, at least for me, my time is very precious for whatever reason. And I don't want you spending it on something that you've already done well enough and already benefited everyone, including yourself, on, if you don't need to. Cool. The other thing that we're going to talk about besides intellectual merit is broader impacts. These broader impacts sort of fall under two different criteria. One is the potential for the proposed project to benefit society. We're going to talk about a few options for what benefiting society might mean. And we want to think about the benefits that are inherent to the research itself, as well as those broader impacts that might stem from other things that relate to the project, activities that flow out of it. You can do a workshop, and then that workshop will then take individuals and allow them to apply it at their home institutions, sort of the branching or the stemming, the networking approach, as well as other projects that would be complemented by the work that we're looking at. It's not to say that the work you're looking at now directly has the outcome that we're talking about, but it might influence it very heavily. These are oftentimes inspirational, motivational, or framework, sort of setting the foundation for others to do work that you can't do yourself, or it takes a whole team to achieve. I want to emphasize there's no prescription, there's no one solid way or one specific way for broader impacts to be assessed. And this will also vary between different program calls and also by personal opinion. One of the things that I often see is somebody will have an idea about what broader impact should mean, and they will then hold that against anyone that proposes a broader impact that is different than that. For instance, if a proposal offers a broader impact, such as increasing participation or developing infrastructure, you can't then say, well, this proposal is not good because it doesn't have a training component, when that's just a different kind of broader impact. We want to think about this in a very holistic sense. That said, if there are specific requirements for whatever funding you're looking at, you need to make sure that that is met. So if the funding solicitation says you have to have a training component, well, then that's a little different than saying you just need to have broader impact. With this in mind, I have a little list here, and I'm going to read it because I want to do justice to some of the nuance that comes up here. That nuance is important in our present context, but I want to emphasize you do not need to be a master of semantics with your review. If you do your best based on your experience and expertise and try to take a constructive approach, the nuance is okay. We just want to make sure that people aren't missing the mark, wasting their time, or purposely or maybe unconsciously being jerks, is maybe a nice way of saying it. So some illustrative examples of desired societal impacts or outcomes are included but not limited to things like increasing participation of women, persons with disabilities, and underrepresented minorities in the research and innovation sector, improved EDI education at all levels. I personally think it's odd that we don't incorporate more EDI themes at like the very early stages of education. There's a lot of emphasis on outreach, but it tends to focus on sort of what I call high school and post-secondary schooling. I don't know. I really like to set at all levels. I think children are overlooked, but they're incredibly sensitive, and they're building the future that all of us have to live in tomorrow, whether we admit that or not. Unless you have the key to a infinite youth, which please share with me. Number 3, that was a joke. I hope it was funny. Probably not. But if it was, laugh yourself, because I am. Good. Increased public EDI literacy and public engagement with EDI themes. Improved well-being for all individuals of society. Increased partnerships between academia, industry, government, and others. Increased national security. I never even thought about that one. That was something that was recommended to me by the Swiss National Science Foundation. They are militarily neutral, which is very different to the US. And so I was very pleased to see that they view EDI as a way of increasing national security. I thought that was so cool. And yeah, I think that counts as a broader impact, something that I hadn't thought of. But yes, that makes sense to me. Again, something that you consider to add to your repertoire of ways of thinking about perspectives as you assess these proposals. Two others are increased economic competitiveness of the UK or anywhere else, and enhanced infrastructure for research and education. This is not a checklist. The things I just said are not like the only 8 options. What I do challenge you to do is play the devil's advocate with yourself and say, is this something I could justify to myself or others? Would I be comfortable if I expressed that? If you are or aren't, add that to your review. That's really useful for me to know, us to know, a funder to know. We don't have your experiences, and if we did, we wouldn't need to ask for peer review. You have something that's very special, your own background, your own expertise, your own insights, and also your own time. Each one of those is incredibly valuable. So please share them with us and make sure you keep that value in your mind too. It's far more important than you might think. Give yourself a little credit. Cool. So in order to provide constructive feedback within the constraints we just mentioned, and thinking about the broader assessment criteria, I have a few check marks here that are very formulaic, but I find I keep this slide or something like it near me whenever I'm doing my proposal reviews, because as we go through these slides, I forget 50 to 80% of what I've even said here to you. And I find that having the slides close to me really helps me stay focused and stay on track. A few of the really helpful tidbits here that will help you with constructive feedback is to read the merit review criteria before you read the proposal. Lots of people don't look at that, make a whole bunch of assessments and assumptions about the proposals, and then find out that the things they're criticizing have nothing to do with what the funding proposal call is about. Take notes and highlight the text when you're reading the proposal. You can do this digitally or manually, but the more that you highlight things, underline things, write little notes, write sentences to yourself, you save yourself time later on, especially if you've already read the criteria, because you can start to fill things out in an ad hoc sense, and then you don't have to go back through the proposal again and again and again and again. It cuts down on the time investment and increases the amount of evidence and concrete examples you can provide in your review. I encourage you to focus on specific strengths and weaknesses with respect to the review criteria. Do not, please, for my own sanity and for yours, spend excessive amount of time writing a lengthy proposal summary. The authors know what they wrote about. The funders probably know what they wrote about and do not want to read everything, sort of paraphrased only. And it wastes time when you could give specific strengths and weaknesses. The more examples you add, even put little quotes and say on page 3, page 2, line whatever, those help the author understand the perspective you're coming from, and it helps save you time. You don't have to paraphrase as often as you might think. Point number 4, state clearly in your review whether or not you recommend that the proposal is funded and why. The more clear you are on this, the easier it is for you to write the proposal review, and the easier it is for the funders to say yes or no to something. As well, if you add examples, that is particularly useful for the person that writes the review. I hate it. I'm going to say the most whenever I get a rejection letter and it says bad, or worse yet, says good, but not fundable. Why? What did I do? Please tell me, because I can't just say fix everything. It's like when someone says, what's wrong? Everything. I can't help you with that one. You need to be a little more specific here. Try to take that mindset into your reviews. Give examples. Yes, sometimes those examples will hurt the person that wrote it a little bit, but I'd argue you can be constructive and give quotes, concrete examples, and then ways of fixing that will be very, very helpful, whether they get funded or not. Building on that includes specific concrete examples from the proposal text in your review. Not only does this help the funder, it helps you with time and helps those getting feedback. And after you've written your review, go back and critically reread it. Ask yourself, is this something that I would want to see? Am I tearing people down or am I lifting them up? This is different than saying, is this something I like? You do not have to like a proposal in order for it to be good. I still struggle with this because I want things that are good to be things I like, not necessary. Good. So once again, I have highlighted here a template that's very useful for constructive feedback. I use this in all of my peer reviews now, whether it is for funding agencies, articles, or just sort of PhD students, my own life. And I might replace intellectual merit with, desired outcomes, something like that, but have a strengths and weaknesses part that's very explicit. It'll show what is good and what is bad, and then that contextualizes your summary and your recommendation at the end. It is formulaic. You can certainly add some of your own art to this part of it, but the more consistent you are in structuring your reviews, the better it is for everyone. Good. With this in mind, I have a few slides now that I want to talk about the limits of information processing. What that means is that we as a species have cognitive processes that can produce unintentional biases in our review assessments. This is different than intentional biases. Those are called being a jerk. Don't be a jerk either, but I'm not going to have special slides about that. More importantly here is I want to talk about things that happen in our minds based on evolution and neurology, maybe a little bit of psychology added in, and make you aware of them. This is not comprehensive unconscious bias training. Rather, this is a few things to keep in mind that most of us do, especially if you're human. If we have any visitors from another universe, once again, please keep me in mind because I would love to meet you. But also, I guess these don't necessarily apply to you. Still good evidence, though, or still good suggestion. Good. The reason I'm saying this is that most human cognition is unconscious. It's an adaptive trait that allows our brains to make rapid decisions, even in complex situations. They're oftentimes called snap judgments, intuition, whatever else you want to call it. These processes are natural and they're generally good. They become bad, though, when you're not aware of them and when you allow them to make systematic errors in your decision-making, especially if that's applied to others. This is especially pertinent as we're talking about interdisciplinary, multicultural work. The way that you see the world is not the same as everyone else, I promise. But the way that you see the world is important to you, and it is every bit as valid as however other people see it. What we want to do is separate you from the views of others. There's a few things in particular with respect to cognitive bias that I want to talk about. The choices I've made in discussion topics is based on psychology research. And there are dozens, if not hundreds, of different kinds of cognitive biases. The ones that we're going to look at here are particularly impactful in the context of peer review. They also, oddly enough, really apply to dating. I don't know if there's a correlation there or not, but these are very common biases in dating as well. So if you are single or on the hunt, I guess keep these in mind too. It's generally good advice. The three we're going to talk about is anchoring bias, confirmation bias, and the halo or horn effect. The first of these is the anchoring bias. This one is especially common with respect to expertise or first impressions. It's when you rely too much on a single piece of information or a first impression. This is oftentimes called the anchor. And what it does is prevent you from moving forward and considering subsequent information in an equally critical sense. One of the things that I've read in an actual review before, this is a quote. So if it was you that wrote this, I'm sorry. Anyone could have, though. I like the well-written introduction, so I feel less critical. And in quotes, or in parentheses, it really said, than I should be, of the sketchy methodology. That is kind of interesting to me because it sounds a lot like you're saying, because the introduction was good, we don't have to think about other shortcomings. And that is not really the way that we want to structure this process. You look at each component independently. Likewise, this can be flipped around where you say, I didn't like this section, so I think everything's bad. Either way, you're using an anchor, one piece of information or an initial impression to cloud your impressions of other parts of the proposal and thereby limit its ability to ever do a good thing or a bad thing because you've already made up your mind. What I challenge you to, yeah.
Just a 9-minute warning. And we might have some questions, and I do know how many slides you've got left.
Good. We're going to go in hyperspeed now. You will have these available to you. You can always write to me later on if you want to know more. Anchoring bias. Number 2, confirmation bias. This is when we let our preconceptions or existing expectations shape the evidence that we have available to us and how we apply it. You want to look at all the evidence available to you and be very aware of your beliefs so that you're considering more than just the places they overlap. This is very common in military contexts. You'll see planes shot down and everyone says, look, the places that aren't hit by guns means that they're really safe. No, those places just already got shot down. You haven't seen those ones because they're gone. Confirmation bias. I would highly recommend you put Google confirmation bias. You'll see the example I mean. Good. The third here is the halo horn effect. This is also a very common one in dating. This is where you let the overall impression of a person or specific traits apply to other aspects of that individual. Very commonly in dating, you say, I like how that person looks, so I'm willing to overlook all the things that aren't healthy about them. On the other side of things, you can say, I don't like how that person looks, and so I'm going to overlook the fact that they are a fantastic personality, they're really intellectual, I don't know, they make 7-digit salaries, I don't know, other things that people might think are important. I guess money shouldn't be that one, but you know what I mean. It's very similar in some ways to that anchoring effect, but applied maybe in a slightly different manner. Good. I want to highlight that reducing cognitive biases is not mitigated just by being aware. I challenge you to actively reflect on your own thought processes, challenge yourself to consider alternative views, play the devil's advocate. Can I justify this to others? Can I justify this to myself? Can I justify this in front of someone that I want to impress and like me? And don't rush decisions. Take your time. There's a little bit about bias in language here. I want to emphasize that bias in language is important because grammar and spelling is not an EDICa review criterion. Don't spend your time correcting that. It is very tempting to do so because it's interesting and quite easy, but it is not a reflection of the quality, value, or originality of an idea. A few more things, especially if you're considering bias, when you are in situations of contextual ambiguity, EDI themes often are, be aware that multiple interpretations can cloud your judgment. Be aware that there can be multiple interpretations. You can see this 606 versus 909, depending on the angle you're looking at the same numbers. We have uncertainty or lack of clarity and time pressure stress. These are important because all three of these things are very common in the review process. Give yourself the time you need to do a good job. De-stress the situation. I'm not saying go and get hammered, but have a snack with you. You can take a water break and a pee break. It's okay. Give yourself the time and opportunity to do your best without the pressure of stress, time constraints, etc., as best as you can. Once again, just knowing you have biases is not enough. Engage in those strategies we talked about. Use a template, reflect upon yourself. Print some of these slides and keep them handy when you're doing reviews. It will increase your objectivity and the quality of your peer reviews. It will also save you time. Last but not least, we have a slide here on mitigating biases. These are things we've covered throughout the entire talk so far. Apply structure and consistency to your reviews. That is why I advocate for a template. Use the same evaluation criteria for all proposals. Don't just use the ones you feel like on this instance, sort of use the grand list of them for all the proposals. Question yourself, both the approach you're bringing, but also learn to trust yourself. If you don't know anything and you have a core thought, allow that to be manifest in your review. Just justify it constructively. Imagine justifying your assessment to others. That means telling others what you think about this. I would not say certain things in front of people that I love and care about that I would write on paper. It's probably worth considering when I'm writing a review. And take time to reflect on your decisions. I know you're all crunched for time, probably because the person talking to you is taking way too long in their seminar. And I encourage you to reflect on those decisions before you hit the submit button, even if it's only a few minutes, better yet, a day or two. Remember, your goal is to provide reviews that are thoughtful, helpful, and constructive. By using the tips in this session and a little bit of common sense, bring your best self. You'll help the feedback. You'll help provide feedback to colleagues. You'll help EDICa, and I believe you'll help yourself as well as the grander community to become a better place, especially with respect to equity, diversity, and inclusiveness. I want to thank you so much, especially because I sort of talked too much. I was afraid of that. No one booed or threw any virtual vegetables or fruit at me. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate you considering being reviews. And I want to say thank you on a personal and professional level, both. Let's open it up for some questions. And thank you for the clappy hands. I really like those. They make me very happy.